In the last section, we established that strength training improves performance. Throwing velocity increases, as we indicated, as athletes are stronger, especially from the ground up, through the trunk, into the shoulder, and finally, like we said, out through the hand. But performance is only half the story, right? If we're going to answer the question, why is strength critical in season, then we need to look at the other half of the equation, which is durability. Because a pitcher doesn't just need to throw hard, they need to do it again tomorrow or potentially later that week, and oftentimes deep into a season. And they will need to do it without any kind of degradation that leads to pain or dysfunction, or worse, eventually surgery. And for that, strength is not, well, it's not optional. It's the internal scaffolding that keeps the body stable under repeat high torque movements. Let's look at what the science actually tells us based on recent research. Okay, so let's start off by actually going backwards here, right? We're going to look at one of the most vulnerable regions in a pitcher, which is going to be their medial elbow, specifically the UCL area. It's the structure most associated with Tommy John surgery. We often think of the UCL as a passive ligament, but what protects it during a throw are the dynamic stabilizers, the muscles that support the joint during motion. A 2025 study published in the Orthopedic Journal of Sports Medicine found that the middle finger flexors, especially the flexor digitorum superficialis, big word, FDS, experiences substantial fatigue after just a few innings. These are the muscles responsible for the dynamic elbow stability, and they fatigue faster and more severely than even a global grip strength could detect. Why does this matter? Well, because those local stabilizers, fatigue, valgus stress, doesn't go away. It just gets transferred more and more to the UCL. So, what if we're not training these muscles specifically, locally, and with intention? Well, then we're leaving a key stabilizing system unprepared. And in a long season, that's likely not sustainable. Okay, so we're going to continue shifting down the chain here. So let's shift now to the lower half. A recent study published in the Journal of Athletic Training looked at the relationship between core stability and elbow stress. Specifically, the researchers had pitchers perform a single leg step down task and measured their lumbopelvic hip control. The findings were very clear. Those with more transverse plane pelvic and trunk motion, in other words, those with less control, generated higher elbow varus torque when pitching, more stress. So why does this matter? Well, because it shows that the elbow stress often doesn't originate in the elbow. It's a downstream effect. When the pelvis and trunk don't stabilize properly, the arm, well, it ends up compensating and it absorbs more of the load. This is one of the key reasons strength must be developed systematically. You can't fix an elbow problem with an elbow-only solution if the root cause is a loss of strength or control at the core or lower extremities. I want to actually talk about the shoulder and what happens when the rotator cuff starts to fatigue. In a 2023 study from Sports Health, researchers induced external rotation fatigue in pitchers and then examined their neuromuscular coordination during overhead movements. They found that once the primary shoulder synergies fatigued, compensatory movement patterns took over. The body recognized pulling from secondary muscle groups to try and start to stabilize the joint and complete the task. And while the pitcher could still perform the movement, the internal coordination had changed drastically. The system was now functioning with a degraded efficiency, high internal loads, and significantly less control. So why is this key? Well, fatigue doesn't always look like failure. Pitchers may still throw strikes, velocity may not immediately drop, but the quality of movement, the safety of the movement, well, it's already eroded. And without sufficient in-season strength work, that erosion accumulates quietly until something, well, it gives out. Now, these last two have gone back up to the shoulder, and now we're going to talk about the trunk. And the reason is because I think these are the primary conduits of energy transfer. Similarly, a 2025 study examined adolescent throwers found that glove side and throwing side oblique strength were positively correlated with pelvic and torso rotational velocity. What does this mean? Athletes with stronger abdominal obliques could rotate faster and do it without increasing shoulder or elbow stress. Why? Well, the trunk was doing its job. It was generating and transferring force efficiently. The arm didn't have to overwork to make up for the lacking rotational velocity and ultimately have to create the velocity. This gives us valuable insight. Strength is not just about protecting the arm when you're already elite. It's about setting the foundation early so that energy transfer happens efficiently and no single joint becomes a mechanical bottleneck. So what's the message here? Well, injury, it doesn't quite happen because of one pitch, although it can usually is. It's happening when the body is forced to compensate for missing support over and over until basically the tissues that were never meant to carry those loads finally break down. What does strength do? Well, it helps to distribute the load. It reinforces the musculature that protects the joints, especially under fatigue. It gives the shoulder and elbow the support they need to stabilize against thousands of high-speed throws. And it reduces the likelihood that force gets concentrated in the wrong place, simply because of a proximal segment failed to do its job. This is why strength matters in season, not just for performance, but for preservation. And now that we've covered the why, we can now start to answer the next most important question about in-season training, which is how should pitchers train in season to maintain these adaptations that they've got from the offseason and make sure they don't disappear when the games matter most? This is what we're going to cover next.